The wind howled across the barren plains of Wyoming Territory like a mournful spirit as Sarah Donovan clutched her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders. June 1878 was proving to be unusually cold, especially for a woman and 3 children who had been traveling for days with little more than the clothes on their backs and dwindling hope in their hearts. "Mama, I'm hungry," whispered 5-year-old Emma, her once bright eyes now dull with exhaustion. Sarah stroked her daughter's matted hair. "I know, sweetheart, we'll find food soon." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. They hadn't eaten a proper meal in 2 days, and the small bundle of stale bread she'd been rationing was now gone. 7-year-old James trudged alongside the rickety wagon, too tired to complain anymore. In the back, 3-year-old Thomas had finally fallen asleep, his small body curled against their meager belongings. Sarah's heart ached. After her husband Michael's death from consumption 4 months ago, their landlord in Chicago had given her 1 month to pay the back rent or face eviction. With no family, no money, and nowhere to turn, she had sold what little they had left to purchase this wagon and supplies to head west to find her husband's cousin in Montana Territory. But the journey had proven far more difficult than she'd imagined. A band of thieves had robbed them 2 weeks into their journey, taking most of their supplies and their only horse. Sarah had been pulling the wagon herself since then, her hands raw and bleeding from the effort. As twilight descended, Sarah spotted a weathered signpost ahead. Drawing closer, she made out the faded words, "Broken Spur Ranch 1 mile. Children," she said with forced cheerfulness, "will stop at this ranch and ask for water." And perhaps, if God was merciful, a crust of bread for her starving children. The lane leading to the ranch seemed endless. When the main house finally came into view, Sarah nearly wept with relief. It was a sturdy 2-story structure with a broad porch, warm light glowing from within. A large barn stood nearby, and several corrals housed horses that raised their heads curiously as the strangers approached. Sarah stopped the wagon and helped Emma and James down before lifting Thomas from the back. The little boy whimpered in his sleep. "Mama, will they help us?" James asked, his voice small. "We can only pray they will," Sarah replied, squaring her shoulders. As they approached the house, the front door swung open. A tall man stepped onto the porch, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the lamplight. He wore a work-worn shirt, dusty pants, and a weather-beaten Stetson pulled low over his eyes. "Can I help you, madam?" His voice was deep, with a hint of wariness. Sarah swallowed her pride. "Sir, I apologize for the intrusion. My children and I have been traveling for weeks. Our supplies were stolen and we've run out of food. I wonder if I might trouble you for some water for my children." The man stepped closer, and Sarah could now see his face. He appeared to be in his early 30s, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' growth of beard. His eyes, however, were what caught her attention, a clear, penetrating blue that seemed to see right through her. His gaze moved from Sarah to each of the children, lingering on their hollow cheeks and the way Emma swayed slightly on her feet from weakness. Without a word, he descended the steps and approached them. Kneeling before Emma, he asked gently, "When's the last time you had something to eat, little one?" "2 days ago," Emma whispered. "We had bread." The man's jaw tightened. He stood and looked at Sarah, something unreadable in his expression. "My name's Blake Callahan. This is my ranch." He paused, seeming to make a decision. "You'll never go hungry again," he said firmly, addressing the children but looking at Sarah. "Not as long as I have food to share." Before Sarah could respond, Blake scooped up Emma in one arm and Thomas in the other. "James, follow me," he said to the boy, who looked to his mother for permission. Sarah nodded, tears of gratitude threatening to spill. As they entered the warmth of the house, the scent of beef stew wafted from the kitchen, and Sarah's empty stomach clenched painfully. "Mrs. Sullivan." Blake called out. A plump, gray-haired woman appeared from what must be the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "We have guests who need food, lots of it." "Oh, my stars," the woman exclaimed, taking in the sight of the bedraggled family. "You poor dears, come right this way. I've got stew simmering and fresh bread just out of the oven." As Mrs. Sullivan led them to the kitchen, Sarah caught Blake's eye. "Thank you," she whispered. "We can work to repay your kindness." Something flickered in his eyes, a mix of compassion and something deeper. "We'll talk about that later. For now, just eat." In the kitchen, Mrs. Sullivan served hearty bowls of stew and thick slices of bread slathered with fresh butter. The children ate ravenously, and Sarah had to remind them to slow down lest they make themselves sick. Blake leaned against the doorframe, watching them. "Where are you headed?" he asked Sarah. "Montana Territory," she replied between careful bites. "My husband's cousin has a homestead there." "That's a long way yet," Blake observed, "and dangerous country for a woman alone with children." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "We have no choice." Blake nodded slowly. "You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure something out." Later, after the children had been bathed and put to bed in a spare room, Sarah found herself sitting on the porch with Blake. The night was clear, stars scattered across the vast Wyoming sky. "Your husband," Blake asked quietly, "died of consumption 4 months ago," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the ache in her heart. "Michael was a good man, a carpenter. But when he got sick, we used all our savings for doctors who couldn't help him." Blake nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I lost my wife 5 years ago, childbirth fever, the baby too." Sarah's heart twisted with sympathy. "I'm sorry." They sat in silence for a moment, two souls acquainted with grief. "Mrs. Donovan, please call me Sarah." "Sarah, I run this ranch with just Mrs. Sullivan to keep house and 2 hands to help with the cattle. I could use someone to help Mrs. Sullivan and look after things around the house." He paused. "You and your children could stay here. I have plenty of room." Sarah stared at him, disbelieving. "Mr. Callahan, Blake. Blake, I couldn't possibly impose. We're strangers to you." His blue eyes were steady on hers. "I believe I'm a good judge of character, Sarah. And I know what it's like to be alone in this world." He glanced toward the room where her children slept. "Those little ones deserve a safe place to grow up, and you deserve a chance to build a new life." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you do this for us?" Blake was quiet for a long moment. 5 years ago, when Laura and our baby died, I nearly gave up, thought about selling everything and heading somewhere else. But an old Arapaho man stopped by the ranch one day, said he was hungry. I fed him and we talked for hours. Before he left, he told me something I've never forgotten." Blake's voice grew soft. "He said the Great Spirit does not bring people to our fires without reason. Sometimes we must feed strangers to feed our own souls." He looked at Sarah, his expression earnest. "I don't know why you ended up at my ranch tonight, but I know you were meant to be here." Sarah wiped away a tear. "If you're certain, we would be grateful to stay, but only if you'll allow me to earn our keep." Blake smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "That's settled then." "Welcome to Broken Spur Ranch, Sarah Donovan." As Sarah lay in bed that night, in clean sheets that smelled of sunshine, she wondered at the strange turn her life had taken. She had set out for Montana with nothing but desperation and the name of a distant relative who might not even welcome them. Now they had found shelter with a kind stranger who had promised her children would never go hungry again. She wasn't naive enough to believe everything would be simple from now on. But for the first time since Michael's death, Sarah felt a small flicker of hope in her heart. At dawn, Sarah awoke to the sounds of the ranch coming to life. Roosters crowed, cattle lowed in the distance, and men's voices called to each other as they began their day's work. For a moment she was disoriented, then remembered where they were. She dressed quickly in her worn dress, the only one she had, and went to check on her children. They were still sleeping soundly, their faces peaceful. Sarah's heart swelled with love and gratitude. She slipped quietly from the room and made her way downstairs, following the scent of coffee and frying bacon. In the kitchen, Mrs. Sullivan was bustling about, humming as she worked. "Good morning," Sarah said. "Please let me help you." Mrs. Sullivan turned with a warm smile. "Good morning, dearie. You're up early. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," Sarah admitted. "Now, what can I do? You can sit right down and have some coffee first," Mrs. Sullivan insisted, pouring a steaming cup and placing it before Sarah. "Mr. Blake told me you'll be staying on to help around the house. I couldn't be happier. These old bones aren't what they used to be, and this place could use a woman's touch." As they prepared breakfast together, Mrs. Sullivan, "Call me Ida, everyone does," told Sarah about the ranch. "Mr. Blake inherited it from his father 6 years ago, built it up from nearly nothing, works harder than any man I've ever known. She lowered her voice. Hasn't been the same since he lost his Laura, though, keeps to himself mostly except for business. Good man, but lonely. Sarah was about to respond when the back door opened and Blake entered, bringing the smell of morning air and horses with him. He'd clearly been up for hours, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his hair damp with sweat. "Morning, ladies," he said, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. His eyes met Sarah's, and she felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach. "Good morning," she replied. "I hope you don't mind that I've invaded Ida's kitchen." "Mind? Why would I mind having two beautiful women preparing my breakfast?" He grinned, and Sarah was struck by how it transformed his face, erasing the lines of worry and making him look younger. The children came downstairs then, shy at first but quickly warming to Blake when he showed them a litter of kittens that had been born in the barn 2 weeks earlier. Over breakfast, Blake outlined what needed to be done around the ranch. "I've got two hands, Pete and Hank, who help with the cattle and horses. Good men, both of them. They live in the bunkhouse out back." "Will we meet them?" James asked eagerly. Blake smiled at the boy. "Sure will. In fact, if your ma doesn't mind, I thought you might like to come with me after breakfast to feed the horses." James's eyes widened with excitement. "Can I, Mama, please?" Sarah couldn't remember the last time she'd seen such enthusiasm in her son's face. "Of course, if Mr. Callahan doesn't mind." "It's Blake, remember, and I'd be glad for the company," he said, winking at James. After breakfast, Blake took James to the stables while Sarah helped Ida with the dishes. Emma sat at the table, drawing pictures with a piece of charcoal on the back of an old shipping label, while Thomas played with a wooden horse Blake had given him. "He's good with children," Sarah observed, watching through the window as Blake patiently showed James how to approach a horse safely. "Always has been," Ida agreed. "Would have made a wonderful father," she sighed. "Such a shame what happened." As the days passed, Sarah and her children settled into life at Broken Spur Ranch. Sarah worked alongside Ida, learning to manage the household. She mended clothes, cooked meals, preserved food for the coming winter, and kept the house clean. Her children thrived in the fresh air and open spaces, their cheeks filling out as they ate regular, hearty meals. James followed Blake around like a shadow whenever he could, soaking up knowledge about horses and cattle. Blake seemed to enjoy the boy's company, teaching him patiently and praising his efforts. Emma helped in the kitchen and garden while Thomas toddled after them all, babbling happily. 2 weeks after their arrival, Sarah was hanging laundry on the line when Blake rode in from checking the north pasture. He dismounted smoothly and led his horse toward the stable, stopping when he saw her. "Need some help with that?" he asked, approaching. "I'm nearly finished, but thank you," Sarah replied, reaching for another of his shirts. As she pinned it to the line, she was acutely aware of him watching her. "That dress is looking mighty worn," Blake observed. Sarah felt her cheeks flush. She'd been washing her single dress at night and wearing it again each day. "It's seen better days," she admitted. "There's a trunk in the attic with some of Laura's things," Blake said quietly. "She was about your size, might be something you could use." Sarah stopped, a wet pillowcase in her hands. "Blake, I couldn't possibly, they're just sitting there," he interrupted gently. "She would have wanted them to be used." Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of pain but saw only sincere offering. "If you're certain, I would be grateful." "The children need new clothes as well. Perhaps I could alter some things for them." Blake nodded. "I'll bring the trunk down this evening." He hesitated, then added, "There's going to be a social at the church in town on Saturday. Thought you and the children might enjoy going." "Meet some of the neighbors." "That would be lovely," Sarah said, surprised. "But we've no way to get there." Blake's mouth quirked up at one corner. "I thought I might drive you, if you'd like." Their eyes met and something passed between them, something new and tentative. "We would like that very much," Sarah said softly. That evening, after the children were asleep, Blake brought down Laura's trunk. He set it in Sarah's room and left her to explore its contents alone, an act of sensitivity that touched her deeply. The trunk contained dresses, blouses, skirts, and even a pair of sturdy boots that fit Sarah perfectly. There were also fabrics and notions that could be used to make clothes for the children. As Sarah held up a pretty blue dress, she felt a connection to the woman who had worn it before. Laura Callahan had been loved by the man who now offered shelter to Sarah and her children. The weight of that knowledge settled on Sarah's heart. Saturday dawned clear and bright. Sarah dressed in Laura's blue dress, which she had carefully altered to fit her, and helped the children into their best clothes, also modified from items in the trunk. When they came downstairs, Blake was waiting in the parlor, dressed in a clean shirt, vest, and his best pants. He looked up as they entered, and his breath caught visibly. "You look beautiful," he said to Sarah, his voice husky. "Thank you," she replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. The church social was held in the small town of Pine Creek, a 15-mile drive from the ranch. The wooden church had a large yard where tables had been set up and decorated with wildflowers. Women bustled about with covered dishes, and men stood in groups, discussing cattle prices and weather forecasts. As Blake helped Sarah down from the wagon, she felt eyes turn toward them. It had been years since Blake Callahan had brought a woman to a social event, and curiosity was evident on every face. "Blake, good to see you," called a tall man with silver-streaked hair. He approached with a plump, friendly-looking woman at his side. "And who might these folks be?" Blake placed a hand lightly on Sarah's back. "Sheriff Wallace, Mrs. Wallace, this is Mrs. Sarah Donovan and her children James, Emma, and Thomas. They're staying at Broken Spur for a while. Sarah's helping Ida with the household." Sheriff Wallace's eyebrows rose slightly, but his wife immediately stepped forward with a warm smile. "How lovely to meet you, Mrs. Donovan. We're so pleased you could join us today." Throughout the afternoon, Sarah was introduced to what seemed like every resident of Pine Creek. Most were welcoming, though she noticed a few of the unmarried women eyeing her with speculation and perhaps a touch of resentment. Blake Callahan, she quickly realized, was considered quite a catch in these parts. As the sun began to set, music started up. A fiddle, banjo, and harmonica played by local men. People cleared a space for dancing, and couples took to the makeshift dance floor. Blake, who had been speaking with the blacksmith, returned to where Sarah sat watching the children play with other youngsters. "Would you care to dance?" he asked, extending his hand. Sarah hesitated. "I haven't danced since Michael." She trailed off. Blake's expression softened. "I understand. Perhaps another time." "No," Sarah said, suddenly standing. "I would like to dance." His smile was worth her momentary discomfort. As Blake led her to the dance floor, his hand warm and steady at her waist, Sarah felt eyes following them. But when the music started and they began to move together, everyone else seemed to fade away. Blake was a good dancer, guiding her confidently through the steps of the waltz. "You dance beautifully," he murmured. "It's been a long time," Sarah admitted. "Michael loved to dance." "Tell me about him," Blake said gently. As they danced, Sarah spoke of her husband, his kindness, his skill with wood, his love for their children. Blake listened attentively, his blue eyes never leaving her face. "He sounds like a good man," Blake said when she finished. "He was," Sarah agreed. "And Laura, what was she like?" A shadow crossed Blake's face, but he answered. "Spirited, always laughing. She could ride as well as any man on the ranch and never complained about the hard work or isolation." His voice softened. "She wanted children more than anything." Sarah's heart ached for him. "I'm sorry, Blake." "Don't be," he said, his voice growing stronger. "I've learned that grief is the price we pay for love, and love is always worth it." As they continued to dance, Sarah became aware of a subtle shift between them. There was a new awareness, a recognition of shared experiences and mutual understanding. When Blake's hand tightened slightly at her waist, Sarah felt a warm flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with exertion. The drive back to the ranch was quiet, the children sleeping in the back of the wagon, exhausted from their day of play. The night was cool, and Blake had wrapped a blanket around Sarah's shoulders. Stars spread across the vast Wyoming sky, countless and brilliant. "Thank you for today," Sarah said softly. "It was wonderful to meet everyone." Blake glanced at her, his profile strong in the moonlight. "They all liked you, especially Sheriff Wallace's wife. She's the biggest gossip in 3 counties, so you can consider yourself officially accepted into Pine Creek society." Sarah laughed. "Is that important?" "Could be," Blake replied enigmatically. When they arrived at the ranch, Blake carried the sleeping children to their beds while Sarah removed her borrowed finery. Later, they sat on the porch, as had become their habit in the evenings after the children were asleep. "Sarah," Blake began, his voice serious, "I want you to know that you and the children can stay here as long as you wish. But if you still want to continue to Montana, I'll help you get there safely when the time comes." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "When I left Chicago, Montana seemed like my only option. Now." She looked at Blake. "Now I'm not so sure." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars and listening to the night sounds of the ranch, their hands entwined, summer deepened, days stretching long and golden. Sarah and the children had been at Broken Spur for nearly 2 months, and the ranch was beginning to feel like home. The children had settled in completely, James learning to ride and help with small chores around the ranch, Emma becoming Ida's little shadow in the kitchen, and Thomas growing sturdy and tanned from playing in the sunshine. Sarah, too, had found her place. She and Ida worked together efficiently, managing the household and making the ranch house more comfortable than it had been in years. Sarah had discovered a talent for gardening, expanding the kitchen garden to include more vegetables and even some flowers. But it was her relationship with Blake that had undergone the most significant change. What had begun as gratitude had gradually evolved into friendship, respect, and something deeper that neither of them had yet put into words. They spent their evenings together after the children were in bed, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence. Sarah had learned about Blake's childhood as the son of a hardscrabble rancher, his dreams for Broken Spur, and his quiet faith that had seen him through the darkest days after Laura's death. In turn, she had shared her own hopes and fears, the struggles of her early marriage, and her determination to give her children a better life. On a warm August evening, Blake suggested a ride to show Sarah a special place on the ranch. Ida agreed to watch the children, giving Sarah a knowing smile that made her blush. They rode for nearly an hour, Blake leading the way through pastures and along a meandering creek until they reached a secluded valley. A clear pool fed by a small waterfall sparkled in the late afternoon sunlight, surrounded by cottonwoods and willows. Wildflowers dotted the lush grass. "Blake, it's beautiful," Sarah breathed as he helped her dismount. "My father showed me this place when I was a boy," Blake said, spreading a blanket on the grass. "Said it was where he proposed to my mother." He looked at Sarah, something significant in his gaze. "I've never brought anyone else here." They sat on the blanket, sharing the picnic lunch Sarah had packed. The conversation flowed easily between them, punctuated by comfortable silences. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Blake turned to face Sarah fully. "Sarah," he began, his voice unusually hesitant, "these past months with you and the children at Broken Spur, they've been the happiest I've known in a long time." Sarah's heart quickened. "For us as well," she said softly. Blake took her hand. "I know it hasn't been long since you lost Michael, and I respect the love you shared with him, but I can't deny what I feel for you." Sarah looked into his blue eyes, seeing the emotion there. "And what is that, Blake?" "Love," he said simply. "I love you, Sarah. I love your strength, your kindness, your devotion to your children. I love the way you've brought life back to my home and, to me." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. "Oh, Blake, I'm not asking for anything right now," he continued quickly. "I just wanted you to know. And to tell you that, whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, I would be honored to make you my wife and be a father to your children." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her heart full. "Michael will always be a part of me," she said finally. "He gave me my children, years of happiness and memories I'll always cherish." She squeezed Blake's hand. "But my heart has room for new love, for you." Blake's expression transformed with hope. "Sarah, are you saying, 'I love you too,'" she whispered. "I didn't expect it, wasn't looking for it, but it found me anyway." Blake reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. "May I kiss you?" Sarah nodded, her eyes never leaving his. His lips met hers in a tender kiss that deepened as Sarah responded, her arms sliding around his neck. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," Blake admitted, his forehead resting against hers. Sarah smiled. "I've wanted you to." They stayed in the valley until dusk, talking about their future, making plans. Blake was patient, understanding Sarah's need to take things slowly, to be sure the children were ready for this change in their lives. "They already adore you," Sarah assured him. "Especially James, you've been so good with him." "He's a fine boy," Blake said. "All your children are wonderful. I already think of them as my own." As they rode back to the ranch in the gathering darkness, Sarah felt a sense of rightness, of coming home in more ways than one. The path ahead wouldn't always be easy. Life in the West never was, but they would face it together. The next morning, Sarah and Blake gathered the children in the parlor to talk to them. James, perceptive as always, seemed to sense something important was coming. Emma clutched her doll, eyes wide, while Thomas crawled into Sarah's lap. "Children," Sarah began gently, "you know that Mr. Blake has been very kind to us, giving us a place to stay and food to eat. And teaching me to ride," James added enthusiastically. Sarah smiled. "Yes, and many other things. Mr. Blake and I have something important to ask you." Blake leaned forward, his expression serious but warm. "I care very deeply for your mother and for all of you. I would like to ask her to marry me, which would make me your stepfather, but only if that's all right with you." James's eyes widened. "You want to be our pa?" "I could never replace your real father," Blake said carefully. "But yes, I would be honored to be a father to you." Emma looked thoughtful. "Would we stay here forever then, not go to Montana?" "That's right," Sarah confirmed. "This would be our home. And I could keep learning about the horses," James asked Blake. "Every day," Blake promised. "And when you're older, you'll help me run this ranch if you want to." James broke into a wide grin. "I think it's a fine idea," Emma nodded solemnly. "Me too, I like it here, and Ida says I'm becoming a good cook." All eyes turned to Thomas, who had been listening with the limited understanding of a 3-year-old. "Blake," he said definitively, reaching his arms toward the man. Blake took the little boy, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I'll take that as approval," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Sarah felt tears of joy gathering. "Then it's settled. We're going to be a family." That evening, after the children were asleep, Blake formally proposed under the stars on the porch where they had spent so many evenings getting to know each other. He presented Sarah with a ring that had belonged to his mother, a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the moonlight. "It's not fancy," he apologized, "but it was given with love, just as I give my heart to you." "It's perfect," Sarah assured him as he slipped it onto her finger. Just like this moment. They decided to marry in October when the fall roundup was complete and before winter set in. This would give them time to prepare the children and the house, and for Sarah to make a wedding dress. Blake insisted she choose any fabric she wanted from the mercantile in Pine Creek, regardless of the cost. Word of their engagement spread quickly through the small community. Most reactions were positive. Blake was well respected, and people had taken to Sarah and her children. There were a few raised eyebrows at the relatively short time since her widowhood, but as Ida pointed out tartly, life's too short and too hard out here to waste time on foolish conventions. Those two deserve happiness. As the wedding date approached, the ranch became a flurry of activity. Ida and Sarah cleaned every corner of the house, hung new curtains Sarah had sewn, and prepared to host the wedding celebration. Blake and his ranch hands built new furniture for the children's rooms and expanded the kitchen garden. James proudly helped with every project, soaking up Blake's praise and guidance like a sponge. 2 weeks before the wedding, disaster struck. A telegram arrived from the sheriff in Pine Creek. Rustlers had been spotted in the area and ranchers were warned to be vigilant. Blake immediately increased patrols of the ranch boundaries, taking James with him on shorter rides near the house. 3 days later, Blake and his hands discovered that 20 head of cattle had been stolen from the north pasture. Tracks led toward the mountains where the rugged terrain would make pursuit difficult. "I have to go after them," Blake told Sarah that evening. "Those cattle represent a significant investment, and if rustlers think Broken Spur is an easy target, they'll be back for more." Sarah's heart clenched with fear. How dangerous will it be? Blake didn't sugarcoat it. Rustlers are desperate men. They won't give up the cattle without a fight. He saw the worry in her eyes and took her hands in his. Sheriff Wallace is putting together a posse. We'll have numbers on our side. How long will you be gone? A few days, maybe a week. Depends on how far they've gone and whether we can track them in the mountains. Sarah nodded, forcing back her fears. This was the reality of life in the West, dangers that couldn't be avoided, only faced with courage. When do you leave? First light tomorrow. The sooner we start, the better chance we have of catching them. Blake pulled her into his arms. I'll come back to you, Sarah. We have a wedding to attend, remember? Sarah managed a smile, though her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'll hold you to that promise, Blake Callahan. That night, as they said their goodbyes privately on the porch, Blake held Sarah as if he never wanted to let her go. I love you, he whispered against her hair. You and the children are my life now. Come back to us, Sarah replied, her voice catching. That's all I ask. The next morning, Sarah and the children watched as Blake rode away with his 2 ranch hands, joining the sheriff's posse at the edge of the property. James was disappointed at being left behind but took seriously Blake's instruction to be the man of the house. While he was gone, days passed with agonizing slowness. Sarah kept herself and the children busy with preparations for the wedding, but her heart wasn't in it. Every sound of approaching horses brought her rushing to the window, only to be disappointed. 6 days after Blake's departure, a rider appeared on the horizon. Sarah's heart leaped, then plummeted as she realized it wasn't Blake but Pete, one of the ranch hands. He was slumped in his saddle, and as he drew closer, she could see a crude bandage around his upper arm, stained with blood. Sarah ran to meet him as he dismounted awkwardly. Pete, what happened? Where's Blake? Pete's face was grim beneath several days' growth of beard. We caught up to the rustlers in the high country. There was a fight. Blake took a bullet in the shoulder. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Is he? He's alive, Pete assured her quickly. Sheriff's bringing him back in a wagon. They're about half a day behind me. Blake insisted I ride ahead to tell you he's all right. Relief made Sarah's knees weak. Thank God, and the rustlers? 2 dead, 3 captured. We recovered most of the cattle. Pete swayed slightly, and Sarah realized he was exhausted and injured himself. Come inside. Let me tend to that arm while we wait for them. The hours dragged by as Sarah cleaned and rebandaged Pete's wound, a bullet graze that looked painful but not serious, and prepared for Blake's arrival. She made up their bed with fresh linens, boiled water for cleaning wounds, and set Ida to preparing beef broth and other easily digestible foods. It was nearly sunset when the wagon finally arrived. Sarah ran out to meet it, her heart in her throat. Blake was lying in the back, pale but conscious. His left shoulder was heavily bandaged, and he looked exhausted, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. I told you I'd come back, he said weakly as the sheriff and his deputy carefully lifted him from the wagon. On a stretcher instead of a horse, Sarah replied, trying for lightness despite her worry. Always one for dramatic entrances, Mr. Callahan. Blake managed a smile. Had to keep things interesting. Once Blake was settled in bed, the local doctor who had accompanied the wagon examined his wound. Clean through the shoulder, he reported to Sarah. Missed anything vital. He's lost blood and needs rest, but with proper care, he should heal completely. Sarah thanked the doctor profusely and saw him and the sheriff out. When she returned to Blake's side, he was already looking better for being home in his own bed. I'm sorry about this, he said, gesturing to his bandaged shoulder. Not exactly how I planned to spend the weeks before our wedding. Sarah sat beside him, taking his uninjured hand. As long as you're here and alive, that's all that matters. The wedding can wait until you're healed, Sarah interrupted firmly. I'm not going anywhere, Blake Callahan. Blake squeezed her hand. I was so afraid I wouldn't make it back to you and the children. But you did, Sarah said softly. And now you're going to rest and get better because I expect you to dance with me at our wedding. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah nursed Blake diligently. The bullet wound was healing well, but he developed a fever that left him weak and sometimes delirious. During those difficult nights, as she bathed his burning forehead with cool cloths, Sarah prayed as she had never prayed before. The children were concerned but resilient. James appointed himself Blake's assistant, fetching water and reading to him from Blake's favorite books when he was lucid enough to listen. Emma drew pictures to decorate his room, and even little Thomas seemed to understand the need to be quiet around Papa Blake, as he had taken to calling him. Gradually, Blake's strength returned. By the beginning of November, he was able to leave his bed for short periods, though his left arm remained in a sling. The wedding had been postponed indefinitely, but neither Sarah nor Blake seemed concerned about that. They had faced death together and emerged stronger in their commitment to each other one evening. As the first snow of winter dusted the ranch with white, Blake called the family together in the parlor. He was still pale but stood straight and tall before the fireplace. "I've been thinking," he began, looking at each of them in turn. "We've put off the wedding because of my injury, but I don't want to wait any longer to make us officially a family." Sarah felt a surge of joy. "Are you sure you're strong enough?" Blake smiled. "I might not be able to dance yet, but I can certainly stand before a preacher and say my vows." His expression grew more serious. "Life out here is uncertain, as we've been reminded. I don't want to waste a single day that we could be together as husband and wife." And so, 2 days later, with only Ida, Pete, Hank, and the children as witnesses, Sarah and Blake were married by the minister from Pine Creek in the parlor of Broken Spur Ranch. Sarah wore the blue dress she had made from fabric Blake had insisted on buying before his injury. Blake wore his Sunday suit, his left arm still in a sling but a broad smile on his face. "I, Blake William Callahan, take thee, Sarah Elizabeth Donovan, to be my lawful wedded wife," he said, his voice strong and sure. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." As Sarah repeated her own vows, she felt as if her heart might burst with happiness. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Blake kissed her tenderly, and the small gathering erupted in cheers. That night, after a celebratory dinner prepared by Ida and a tearful toast from James, who solemnly thanked Blake for saving us from hunger and giving us a home, Sarah and Blake retired to the master bedroom that was now officially theirs to share. Despite his injury, Blake had insisted on carrying Sarah across the threshold. Now, as they stood together in the room lit only by firelight, Sarah felt a moment of shyness. "Are you sure you're well enough for?" she began. Blake's smile was tender as he touched her cheek. "I'm well enough to hold my wife, even if we must be careful of my shoulder." He drew her gently into his arms. "We have all our lives for the rest, Sarah. Tonight I just want to fall asleep with you beside me, knowing you're mine and I'm yours." Sarah rested her head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. "I love you, Blake Callahan, and I love you, Sarah Callahan," he replied, the new name sending a thrill through her. "More than I ever thought possible." Winter settled over Broken Spur Ranch, bringing short days and long nights that the newly formed family filled with warmth and love. Blake's shoulder healed steadily, and by Christmas, he was able to use his arm again, though it would be months before he regained full strength. The holiday was a joyous one, with Blake insisting on cutting the largest pine tree that would fit in the parlor. The children decorated it with paper chains, popcorn strings, and small wooden ornaments that Blake carved for them. On Christmas morning, there were presents for everyone: dolls for Emma, a hand-tooled leather saddle for James that Blake had secretly commissioned from the saddle maker in Pine Creek, wooden blocks for Thomas, and a beautiful silver hairbrush for Sarah. "It was my mother's," Blake told her as she ran her fingers over the intricate design. "She would have loved you." As winter gave way to spring, the ranch became busy with new life. Calves were born, the garden needed planting, and the house required spring cleaning after the long winter. Sarah threw herself into these tasks with energy and joy, grateful for the life she and her children had found. One evening in late April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Blake took Sarah's hand. "I've been thinking about something," he said, his tone serious. "What is it?" Sarah asked, immediately concerned. "It's about the children," Blake began. "They still use Donovan as their last name. I was wondering how you would feel about me legally adopting them, making them Callahans like us." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Blake. You truly consider them your own, don't you?" "From the moment you arrived at my ranch," he admitted. "But only if you're comfortable with it. I know Michael will always be their father." He would have wanted them to have a father who loves them, Sarah said softly, and you do so completely. Yes, I would be honored if you adopted them. The legal adoption was finalized in June, nearly a year after Sarah and her children had arrived at Broken Spur Ranch. The children were thrilled with their new surname, especially James, who proudly introduced himself as James Callahan, future rancher, to everyone he met. Life settled into a rhythm of work and joy. The ranch prospered under Blake's careful management, with Sarah contributing ideas that often proved valuable. James, now 8, became increasingly capable around the ranch, showing a natural aptitude for working with horses that made Blake beam with pride. Emma developed into a thoughtful, kind-hearted girl who helped care for her younger brother and showed talent with needle and thread. Thomas, growing sturdy and adventurous, followed his older siblings everywhere, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. In the spring of 1880, nearly 2 years after Sarah had arrived at Broken Spur with her hungry children, she shared special news with Blake one evening as they sat in their favorite spot on the porch. "Blake," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently on her stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Blake's expression transformed from surprise to wonder to pure joy. "A baby, Sarah, are you sure?" She nodded, smiling through happy tears. "Ida suspected weeks ago, but I wanted to be certain before I told you. The baby should arrive in late October." Blake gathered her in his arms, his blue eyes bright with emotion. "I never thought I'd have this chance again," he whispered. "Thank you, my love." The next day, they shared the news with the children, who reacted with excitement, especially Emma, who immediately began planning all the things she would teach her new brother or sister. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer months. Blake was attentive to the point of hovering, causing Sarah to laugh and shoo him away when his concern became overwhelming. "I've done this 3 times before, remember?" she would remind him. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." But Sarah understood his anxiety, knowing the shadow of his first wife's death in childbirth hung over him. She made sure to follow every recommendation from the doctor in Pine Creek and allowed Ida to pamper her more than she might have otherwise. As her due date approached, Blake hired an additional hand to help with the ranch work and arranged for the doctor to stay at a nearby farm so he could be summoned quickly when the time came. Sarah was touched by his preparations, but continued to assure him that everything would be fine. On a crisp October evening, just as the sun was setting, Sarah felt the first contractions. Blake, who had barely left her side for days, immediately sent James to fetch Ida from the kitchen and Pete to ride for the doctor. "It's too early to need the doctor," Sarah protested, but Blake was adamant. "I'm not taking any chances," he said firmly. The labor progressed steadily through the night. Blake remained by Sarah's side, holding her hand, wiping her brow and murmuring words of encouragement as Ida directed the practical aspects of the birth. The children had been sent to stay with the sheriff's wife in town, though James had protested vigorously, insisting he was old enough to help. As dawn broke over the eastern hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Sarah gave a final push, and their daughter slipped into the world with a lusty cry that immediately brought tears to Blake's eyes. "A girl," Ida announced happily, wrapping the infant in a soft blanket after cleaning her. "And a strong one at that." Blake, who had never witnessed childbirth before, stared in awe as Ida placed the tiny bundle in Sarah's arms. "She's perfect," he whispered, gently touching the downy head covered with dark hair. "Just like her mother." Sarah looked up at her husband, seeing the love and wonder in his eyes. "What shall we name her?" she asked softly. Blake hesitated only briefly. "I was thinking. Perhaps Laura after my first wife, and Elizabeth after your mother." Sarah's heart swelled with love for this man who honored the past while embracing their future together. "Laura Elizabeth Callahan," she said, testing the name. "It's beautiful." Blake leaned down to kiss her tenderly. "Thank you for our daughter, for our family, for everything." The children returned that afternoon, bursting with excitement to meet their new sister. James approached the cradle cautiously, studying the tiny face with serious concentration. "She doesn't look like much of a rancher yet," he observed, causing the adults to laugh. "Give her time." Blake replied, ruffling the boy's hair. "I have a feeling Laura will surprise us all." Emma was enchanted, immediately asking when she could help care for the baby. Thomas, now 5, was less impressed, but promised solemnly to be a good big brother. As Sarah watched her family gathered around the newest Callahan, she thought back to that desperate day when she had arrived at Broken Spur Ranch with 3 hungry children and no hope for the future. Blake had promised then that they would never go hungry again, but he had given them so much more love, security, and a true home. In the years that followed, the Callahan family continued to grow and thrive. 2 more children joined them, William Michael in 1882 and Rebecca Grace in 1884, completing their family of 8. James grew into a capable young man who worked alongside Blake, eventually taking on more responsibility as Blake grew older. Emma married the schoolteacher in Pine Creek and settled nearby, while Thomas showed a talent for medicine and was sent east to study, returning years later as the region's most respected doctor. Through it all, the harsh winters, summer droughts, economic hardships, and occasional threats from rustlers or other dangers of frontier life, Sarah and Blake faced each challenge together, their love only deepening with time. On warm summer evenings, they still sat together on the porch, watching the sunset and marveling at the life they had built. "Did you ever imagine this?" Blake would sometimes ask, "when you pulled that wagon up to my ranch all those years ago?" And Sarah would smile, remembering the desperation and fear of that day and the words that had changed her life. "You'll never go hungry again," he had promised. It was a promise he had kept in every way that mattered, filling their lives with not just food, but with love, purpose, and joy that sustained them through all of life's seasons.